What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the latest Godzilla film coming from Toho in Japan, and that film is called Godzilla -1. Written and directed by Takashi Yamazaki, this film stars people like Ryunosuke, Kamiki, Minami, Hamabe, Sakura, Ando, Yuri Yamada, and many, many more. And before we get too far into this review, let's go ahead and hear a word from today's sponsor. Whether you're trying to get yourself in the right headspace for the day, maybe you got a lot of stress going on in your day-to-day life, or you're like me and you do not have a good sleep schedule, you're going to want to try out the sponsor of today's video, and that is Hemp Honey. They use all natural ingredients, no GMOs, no artificial flavors, infused with their hemp extract to give you a various amount of products that can give you different forms of alleviation for your specific needs. Me personally, as I mentioned, I don't sleep all that well, so I've been trying their Hemp Honey sticks, the sleep version, which these are great. You can literally ingest them right out of the stick itself. You can put it into your coffee, into your tea, whatever the case may be. And I'd like it because it doesn't make me ever feel overly drowsy or anything like that. But instead, once I've actually fallen asleep, I'm having far deeper sleep, waking up feeling far more rested. And the kind folks over at Hemp Honey are giving you guys the chance to get 10% off of your order over on their website by following the link in my description box down below and putting promo code Perez10 at checkout. Again, a big thanks to Hemp Honey for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate it. So while I've covered a couple of the American Godzilla films, I've yet to cover any of the films from the original studio that originated Godzilla, which is Toho in Japan. I haven't covered any of those films. This is the first one from Japan that I'll actually be covering. But as a kid, as I've mentioned many times here on the channel, what got me into film was sci-fi, fantasy, creature features, horror films. And without a doubt, the Godzilla films were a part of that for me. I always loved watching the various monster movies when I was a kid, whether it be the Godzilla films and the various monster films that were attached to that, like King Kong and many others. And in recent years, of course, we've had plenty of things specifically coming out of America with the Legendary Pictures films that have very much depicted Godzilla as a hero in a lot of ways, as this creature of nature that's kind of meant to be something that's meant to keep balance when the other monsters end up arising, and ends up being the situation where he is the king of monsters and tries to keep the peace from them destroying the world, still destroying the world in his own way, but ultimately here more to keep the balance, keep the peace amongst the world of monsters. And when it comes to this latest film coming to us out of Japan, they decided to scrap that altogether, which I love, and go back to what Godzilla has always been, which is an absolute force of nature and a monster. This movie goes back to what makes Godzilla awesome, a destructive force that humans have to try to figure out some way to try to destroy, and I'm just so happy to say that Godzilla was menacing and threatening once again in this movie. I really thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed the time spent with Godzilla in particular, and I think one of the things that most people are going to walk out of this movie with a smile with is that it's not just a solid Godzilla film in the sense of Godzilla himself. It doesn't just have the great moments of big monster action, but also has a really solid narrative at the center of this. That's something that you typically don't see in these monster films. Even with the films I grew up loving, renting from Blockbuster as a kid, or the early days of Netflix where I would rent DVDs to watch some of the films I hadn't seen, or even thinking back to the times that I used to watch old, like, over-recorded VHS tapes that my grandfather had of some of these older films, catching it on TV, whatever the case may be. I used to love watching those old school Godzilla films where you got these dudes in rubber suits just tearing down miniature cities and towns and villages, and clearly a lot of it was really goofy even for when I was growing up, but it always got me into those early days of filmmaking. And a lot of times with those movies, the narrative was pretty straightforward. You just had some humans that were either part of the government or just everyday people that were afraid of Godzilla or were going to try to figure out some way to bring him down, but it really never was about that. You know, they usually had some sort of message about nuclear weapons and different things like that, and the underlying part of the Godzilla films, but it was more about the monsters, especially as you got further into the franchise, as we'd get all these various sequels with more and more monsters just tearing each other up in these various cities. And so when it comes to Godzilla films, as time time has gone on, I think the stories have always taken a back seat for the action to be at the forefront. And in a lot of ways, that's plenty of fun. I'm a big fan of big kaiju action with tons of action, and you got all these crazy visuals and really cool things going on. And I think in recent years, whether it be with things like the American productions that Legendary Pictures have put out, or even with something like Shin Godzilla a couple years ago coming out of Japan as well, there's been plenty of fun, cool visual action that's come out of the world of kaiju films and Godzilla films. But with this film, Godzilla Minus One, I'm very happy to say that there's actually a compelling and interesting story here that almost takes a page out of the book of something like Jaws, where Godzilla has some fantastic, prominent moments to showcase the threat that the character is, but ultimately is really honed in on the humans. It allows us to spend some real, slow-built time with these humans, getting to know their stakes in this entire situation, getting to know what's important to them, getting to feel for them, getting to kind of feel conflicted about them. Do you like them? Do you not like them? And ultimately allowing you to root for the heroes in a situation where in a lot of films, Godzilla is the hero. A lot of times, kind of like some slasher films, Godzilla has become this entity that we as a audience just wants to see destroy things and fight other monsters. And a lot of times you don't care about which humans die. You just don't. You don't care if you have a character even played by a big actor that ends up dying in the film, because it's all about the monsters. And Godzilla Minus One kind of takes that away and creates a narrative where you are able to root for the characters. You don't want to see these characters you're following just become cannon fodder. You want to actually root for them. You actually want to feel for them. And there are plenty of moments in this movie, based on my reactions in the theater that I was in, that had plenty of people like applauding and kind of getting engaged in what was going on in the story, which is not something I've personally experienced when it comes to something like a kaiju film, a Godzilla film. Typically, again, it's all about the action. It's always about the badass visuals and the big monster action. And while there's plenty of beautiful, fantastic action in this film that I thoroughly enjoyed, I really found myself invested in the narrative. So let's talk about a little bit what this movie's about. If you're interested, I'm not going to get too deep into spoilers or anything like that, as the movie did just come out this weekend, of course. This movie primarily focuses on the character of Koichi, somebody who is meant to be a kamikaze pilot, but kind of swindles his way out of doing that duty out of fear, of course, of dying, and then comes face to face with Godzilla. He ends up feeling a lot of disgrace for the fact that he kind of swindled his way out of kind of serving his country by being a kamikaze pilot. And when he returns back to his home village, he finds that it's been destroyed and that his family has also been killed. That's when we're introduced to the character of Noriko, a young woman who's found a baby throughout the rubble of this village being destroyed, and now the two of them must work together to care for this child as well as provide for this child, kind of building this very unconventional family with a bunch of individuals who didn't know each other before the tragedies that had occurred because of this war. As time goes on and as they're trying to figure out their own situation, Godzilla rears its ugly head up once again, and now Koichi alongside a bunch of other civilians work together with the military to try to find a way to destroy this creature that seems completely indestructible. That's the base premise of this movie, but what I really enjoyed about it was that there was a dramatic nature to this film. There was an actual narrative to root for, and I think when it comes to Godzilla films, if you're a fan of the Godzilla property up to this point, you're gonna be pleased with the Godzilla stuff, the big action, the kaiju elements, and all the references to the old school era of Godzilla. But it's also a movie that has heart and has story. So I think if you're somebody who's always thought, yeah, the kaiju stuff is cool, but I just can't ever really say I love any of these movies or even really super like these movies simply because the narrative isn't nearly as strong and it's all about the action, then I think you're going to enjoy this film as well, as you could pretty much take this story and change what it is that is kind of causing the threat in the world, whatever the big kind of world ending situation would be, but keep the core of the story here with the characters, and ultimately you kind of would still have a really good story here. Of course, Godzilla is central to this story, but I think that what this movie really did well was have a solid human narrative at the center of it all that ultimately allowed for you to care about these characters, not wanting to see them get hurt over the course of time, which was also aided by the fact that you have great performances here. Oftentimes that can come across a little bit over dramatic, which is pretty common when it comes to Japanese cinema, whether it be things like anime or live action films like this one, but it adds a charm to the movie without a doubt. While there are some moments that felt a little slow at times or maybe a little bit over melodramatic, I can genuinely say though that I had a really good time with this, and as somebody who's been watching Godzilla films since I was a young kid and has always just appreciated them for the over-the-top kind of silly thing that they tend to be, it's nice to have a Godzilla film that still has has one foot in the ridiculous while also having something that's actually tangible, a narrative that you can kind of really grab onto, and moments where you can say, I really care about these characters and I don't just want to see them get killed by Godzilla, who is the titular character that we're pretty much there for. It's nice to have another reason to root for other individuals in a world where Godzilla, the titular character, is the reason that our ass is in the seat. So without a doubt, I think Godzilla -1 is a great time. I think if you're a fan of Godzilla, you're going to be pleased. I think if you're, somebody who's thought it's cool, but you just have always wanted a cooler story, or at least a better story to kind of care about the characters within the cool kaiju action, then there's something to kind of, enjoy there as well. And just something also to kind of add on for longtime fans of Godzilla. While this film is primarily all CGI in terms of Godzilla and doesn't utilize a individual in a practical suit, there are a lot of attention to detail with the way that Godzilla walks throughout the course of this film that is meant to keep it consistent with the way Godzilla has walked and looks in previous installments, while this iteration still has its own kind of feel and look, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And there's also some really solid moments throughout the course of the film where they utilize the original Godzilla music from those earlier installments, which put a smile on my face. I also felt like it wasn't overused. It was something that was very subtly used in the right moments to add to the impact of Godzilla's presence. And again, as a longtime Godzilla fan, which is where this review is coming from, I was just really pleased to have not only a fun, action-heavy Godzilla film that has some cool, badass, kaiju moments, but something with a nice narrative, something that I could really latch onto. And I think that I've only seen it once. I'm curious to see how I feel about it as I revisit it and maybe even revisit some of the older Godzilla films. But I think this is going to be a film that most people are going to think of as one of the better made Godzilla films on an overall level. It's not a perfect film. I think there are some elements that, could have been sped up a little bit, some things that maybe could have been cut out, maybe some CGI effects that could have been, kind of polished a little bit more. I don't necessarily know that the special effects here look as good as even some of the modern day American films that we've gotten, but I like the look, I like the style of the film, and the heart and the charm of what Godzilla has always been about is present in this movie with a solid narrative. So I'm happy to say I enjoyed the film. Sorry if I repeated a few things there, and sorry if I seem like I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm just excited about this movie. I had a good time in the theater. It was nice to see it in a packed theater as well, with a bunch of people that were, chanting at the screen or applauding or, actually having reactions to what's going on, which is, I think, the best thing about seeing a movie with a packed house, is being able to kind of have that overall kind of audience experience. So definitely go and check out Godzilla -1 in your local area. I think it's definitely a movie worth supporting if you're a fan of these kinds of movies, and even if you're not, I think that it's definitely something that's still worth going and check out. So big thanks to you guys for watching. Definitely hit that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. Comment your thoughts down below and let me know what you guys thought about Godzilla -1. All right guys, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.